Today's conversation is with, I think we call them the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson. Jonathan used to be the Minister of the Environment for Canada and also Minister of Natural Resources. He is currently a Member of Parliament in the Vancouver area, and he was a clean energy or clean tech guy before he went into politics. So I think people are going to really enjoy hearing from Jonathan and his career path.
Hi, my name is Renee Stanton, and welcome back to another episode of Career Convos for a Cooler Planet. Today, we welcome our guest, the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, MP of the North Vancouver-Capilano region. Thank you for joining me today, Jonathan.
Not at all. Thank you for inviting me.
So while doing some of my research, I noticed your Instagram caption states, "Proud Dad." Please feel free to share what being a father means to you.
That's an interesting question. I mean, look, when you have children, you get a lot from them, a lot of joy from them, but you also, obviously, it's a responsibility to support them. And as you support them through their lives, they become their own people. And obviously, I think most parents are proud when they see their children flourishing and developing their own personalities. So
Absolutely. So the key to a happy life is a work-life balance, allocating time for family and equally towards your career. What do you find to be the best tip for managing a work-life balance?
I'm probably not a great person to talk to about that. I mean, look, obviously you need to ensure if you want to stay married and be with your family, you need to ensure that you carve out sufficient time and dedicated time. Obviously, depending on the job that you have, that can be easy or it can be very hard. Before I got into politics, I was a CEO and I traveled a lot around the world, and I've been in politics for 10 years. Most of that as a federal cabinet minister from British Columbia, and Ottawa is a long commute from British Columbia. So you have to be very judicious about trying to ensure that you create some space. And so, I often will not do as many things, for example, on the weekends as some of my colleagues will, because I'm not here on Sunday. I'm on an airplane, and so Saturdays normally are a day to spend with my wife, or when my children were smaller, with my children's. You just have to be very conscious and very thoughtful. You can get drawn into politics in a way where it consumes your life, and there is a relatively high divorce rate on Parliament Hill.
Yeah, I bet time management is really one of those crucial skills that they really bang into you young. So I think that's super important. So just last of the warm-up questions, your caption in Instagram also states that you as an outdoor enthusiast. So what has been your favorite view or outdoor experience in your time in British Columbia?
Well, it's a good question. I grew up in Saskatchewan and I lived in Toronto for a number of years. And then we moved out to British Columbia. I think the one very unique thing about British Columbia is you can do things outdoors all year round, because it's actually a lot warmer here than it is in Saskatoon in the middle of winter. And so we live just adjacent to the mountain and just adjacent to the forest, and we spend a lot of time, hiking in the summer, in the spring, in the fall, in the forest, and even in the winter we do that. So, and that's a chance to get back to nature, but it's also a way in which to sort of decompress from work.
I also think that probably helps with the work-life balance as well, being able to have nice warm weather. I went to Kelowna for the first time in May and really enjoyed it compared to my Southern Ontario lifestyle. Very different. So yeah, I bet that's a very lucky feature of your life. Okay, so fantastic. That went great. So now that that's sorted, we're going to begin the actual interview, transitioning into some discussion about your education and your academic background. So you completed an undergraduate degree in honors political science at the University of Saskatchewan. Can you tell me what led you to pursue this degree as an entrance into the academic sector?
I was interested in public policy and in government from an early age, probably earlier than most people would think is normal. And that's not because my parents were involved in politics. Both my parents were social workers, community development workers. I just had an active interest. And so as I went through high school and was trying to decide what I was going to do at university, I actually was thinking about two different things. One was political science and potentially law. The other was actually music, which is quite different from political science. And it just was, for me, I actually, from an early age, thought that politics and public policy, including the public service, who are not political, but they are very much important in the public policy process, that was a way in which you could actually exert influence on the world, that you could actually make change and change for the better. And so that was what I chose to do.
That's awesome. Yeah. So following your undergraduate studies, you received the opportunity to pursue your master's at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. What did this opportunity mean to you as a postgraduate student?
Well, you're very fortunate if you win a Rhodes Scholarship or something akin to a Rhodes Scholarship. It gives you an opportunity. My family did not have a lot of money. I could never have afforded to go to Oxford with my parents paying for it. It enabled me to go to what I would say is one of the world's best schools with some of the most talented students that I've ever gone to school with. And it provided an education that, to be honest with you, was the first time in my life it forced me to actually learn how to work. I pretty much coasted through high school and undergraduate university, and it was Oxford that taught me how to work. That was one. The second is you get exposed to some of the most amazing minds in the world that they bring in to do guest lectures, or even some of the folks that are actually lecturers on an ongoing basis. And the third thing is the Rhodes Scholarship provides you money to travel and to see the world. And the Oxford system is 8 weeks of school, 6 weeks off, 8 weeks of school, 6 weeks off, 8 weeks of school, 4 months off. So there's lots of time to go and travel. Obviously, you have to work partly during the reading periods, and so I went to, Egypt, and I went all over Europe, and I went to a whole bunch of places that I probably never would have gone if I had not had it. So the Rhodes Scholarship was very formative for me.
That's amazing. Did you have a favorite experience or like a particular country that you visited during your time in England, or was there the culture of England that you were drawn to?
I mean, there certainly were a lot of things about England that I enjoyed, but I would say in terms of travel, Egypt was the most interesting. It was phenomenal. If you like history, there's nowhere else in the world that's like Egypt. And I would say at Oxford, one of the favorite things was I actually played on the Oxford ice hockey team, and that was mainly Canadians with a couple of Americans. There were no British people on the team, but it was a nice way to actually bond with people from all over Canada, which was also an interesting thing. So.
That's so fun. Yeah, that's a good way to keep close to your Canadian roots while abroad. Remember your identity. I've heard that Egypt's a great location as well. Just very interesting. Do you feel as if your international experience has benefited you as a member in government, so studying abroad?
Well, I think so. I often say that we should send young people out of the country for a couple of years, partly because it gives them exposure to how different other countries are and the way in which other peoples think, but it also makes you appreciate Canada far more than you do when you live here all the time. Canadians take Canada far too much for granted. This is the best country in the world in which to live.
Yeah.
And the way that you know that is you go away from Canada for a while.
Similarly, I grew up, I'm the granddaughter of immigrants. So I grew up, my parents were workers. So I grew up going back and forth between Portugal and Canada, kind of as a means of daycare in a sense.
Right.
Up until 18, from 3 years old to 18, I spent a lot of time in Europe. And I would say it did the most transformation to my identity and my approach in my education and my careers. It's just such an absolutely wonderful experience. And I completely agree with that it really does show you the true values of being Canadian and makes you really appreciative where you grew up. So I agree with that entirely. Yeah. So with your career experiences, so expansively rooted in the foundations of environment, sustainability, and public policy, how did your academic background shape your preparedness for entering the environmental policy sector?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, my academic background was, as you noted, was in political science, but both of my master's degrees are largely in international relations. And so in terms of how the international community works and the history of how that's all evolved, that's pretty familiar from my academic background. Where I actually got into environmental considerations was really when I moved here from Toronto. I worked for a global management consulting agency in Toronto, and I moved here. I've always been concerned about the environment. My family's vacations were going into the wilderness in the boreal forest and canoeing for a couple of weeks. And my father owned a fishing and canoeing outfitting business that I used to spend my summers at. So I'm very familiar with the wilderness, and so I have an attachment to that. But I became much more animated about issues around climate and other things when I moved out here. Ended up getting a job in the clean technology industry and spent 16, 17 years running companies and being a senior executive in a number of those companies that were really focused on how do you reduce carbon emissions in a manner that's actually consistent with building an economy that's going to create jobs and economic opportunities. My academic background helped me to learn how to think and analyze, which is critically important in many areas and certainly was important for me in that. But the environmental piece of it, particularly climate, came a bit later.
Yeah, as you mentioned, when you have a view such as the views you have in British Columbia, it's easier to feel connected to environmental policy making and trying to do better for the environment. I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario. I don't know if you know
The
Hamilton, but
Hammer, yeah.
yes,
My
Steel City.
my former colleague Catherine McKenna was from the Hammer. She used to talk about
Oh,
it all the
great.
time.
Yeah, no, it is very transformative in my identity as well, being the daughter of a blue collar person that works in the factories, and you don't get a lot of nice views. So yeah, so I find that I have to sometimes detach myself from that heavy industrial sector to be able to realize like the root of all good is found in nature. Yeah, I agree with that. So lovely. That went perfectly. With that, now would be a great time to transition into some questions regarding your career experience. So to start off, how did you get started in your career path? So what was like the application process like applying to work for the government of Saskatchewan?
So I didn't have to go through an application process. When I was in undergraduate in Saskatchewan, I actually was the president of the Saskatchewan Young New Democrats, and I ran the youth wing of this provincial NDP. During that period, I got to know the fellow who was the leader of the NDP. His name was Roy Romano. He was actually the first Ukrainian premier in Canadian history. And when I was finishing at McGill, he called me and asked me to come back. There was going to be an election. It was very clear he was going to win the election, and he asked me to come back and work with him. We were on the cusp of a new constitutional round called the Charlottetown process, and he and I were both very interested in constitutional affairs. So I came back. I worked for a year helping to negotiate on behalf of Saskatchewan. But I was put there largely because I knew him, and then I stayed for a while and worked with him before I ended up going to the business communities.
I guess that's a great example of the intention of this assignment is to build connections and how valuable they are in your career path. So that's great to
Absolutely.
hear. It's something that my generation is trying to continue to hold on to. I know that there's been a transition into like the digitalization of everything. So it's nice to be reminded that connections really do foster your career. So that's great.
They really do.
Yeah. So your career experience has included positions in business, environmental consulting, and government. How do you feel that those experiences have prepared you to become a member of parliament?
Well, I think they prepared me, a lot. I would say, my career has been, some people would say, a bit eclectic in the sense that I worked in constitutional affairs. I worked with the premier in his political office for a year. I then worked in the public service in Saskatchewan for a couple of years in federal provincial relations, which is obviously very important in Canada. And then I decided I wanted to understand how business worked. And so I went to Toronto. I was lucky enough to get taken on by the company that I went to work there, and essentially did an MBA on the job, and was there for a number of years before I actually ended up in clean tech. And in clean tech, I was working as an executive in small companies. When I was a consultant, I was working with Bell Canada and a lot of big companies. And so I would say there are not many folks in Ottawa that actually have an understanding of how the public process works and how the public service works, because in Canada most times you're either a public servant or you're a business person, and very little going back and forth between them, which is different in France and a number of other countries.
Yeah.
So I have that. I've also worked with large organizations. I've worked with small entrepreneurial innovative organizations. And I've worked on some of the issues that are around climate and the future economy. And so they prepared me really well in the sense that it was often the case when I was Minister of the Environment and Minister of Energy and Natural Resources that I actually knew more about some of the subjects that my public servants did.
Yeah.
And I certainly knew how to ask the right questions if I didn't know some of the answers. So that prepared me very well. Sometimes the public servants were a bit taken aback, but led to being able, I think, to actually make better public policy so you could engage that conversation. And it wasn't just the public servants who are the experts in it, just telling you what you should be doing as a minister.
Absolutely. It came from a perspective of complexity with that. So you knew different perspectives, which I'm sure really assisted you in your role in the public and private sector. So as you mentioned, you have extensive experience working as the CEO of multiple clean energy companies, including the former Questair and Biotech. What were some of the most important personal skills you found supported you in your role as CEO?
Well, as a CEO, you have a bunch of important roles. I mean, one is you have to be a thought leader. I mean, you are fundamentally responsible both for the strategy of the organization and for the execution of that strategy. And so it's important to be strong analytically, but I would say successful CEOs have to have also interpersonal characteristics if they're going to be successful over the long term. And that means you need to be able to build a team. You need to be able to build loyalty amongst your team. That doesn't mean sometimes you don't have to have hard conversations with people, but people have to believe that you're fair and that you actually care about them as individuals, not simply as a cog in a wheel. And so I think there are the hard skills, but there are also the soft skills if you actually want to be successful over the long term.
Absolutely. I feel like maybe building rapport with those coworkers and your employees probably benefits you significantly, since that there's difficult conversations become a little bit more easy, that they're not just, yeah, like you said, a cog in a machine. It's great. Serving in several ministerial positions, how is moving between these roles and the experience you've gained within each of them changed the way you approach environmental policymaking as the MP of North Vancouver-Capilano?
So, you know, I ended up deciding to get into politics and to run to be the Liberal nominee and eventually the MP for North Vancouver and now North Vancouver-Capilano, largely because of a concern about climate change. I felt that the previous government under Prime Minister Harper really wasn't taking the climate issue seriously enough. So that animated my campaign. This had been a conservative riding for a long time, and we built an organization in part because there were a lot of other people who cared about some of those issues as well. And I would say in North Vancouver, you know, there are probably three top issues. One is housing, of course, it's the same in many areas. It's transportation because we have bridges we have to get across, but it's climate change and the environment, which for most people out here is really important. So I have tried to advocate on those issues since I was elected. I have been fortunate that I've been in the cabinet for a long time, and all of those portfolios had significant environmental implications. You know, Fisheries and Oceans has major environmental implications around the oceans, around water, around, you know, a whole bunch of species, whales and salmon and everything else. I was Minister of Environment and Climate Change for a long time and then Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. So I've had the opportunity to have, I think, you know, more impact than I would have just as an MP. But you know, the learnings through working in those things also helped me to be a better MP in terms of articulating things. I write a monthly column that goes into the local paper, and it draws on a lot of the experience that I've had in the different ministries in the context of communicating with my constituents here in BC.
Yeah, and then having so many different experiences, again, everything comes back to perspective, which is nice. So it accounts for the perspectives of different individuals who are reading who maybe connect to different issues. So it's very interesting. So just reflecting back, did you have a particular ministerial position that you preferred? I know that I think it was Natural Resources, the Ministry of Natural Resources, that you more longer held position for. So I'm just curious, was there like any motivation that went into that, or just a little bit more personal?
Not a motivation that went into that. I mean, ultimately, you serve when the Prime Minister asks you to serve in whatever role the Prime Minister asks you to serve in, or you're not in cabinet. Given that I had worked on climate issues for a long time, and given that I got into politics because of that particular issue, I was extremely honored to be named the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And I was there for, I think, almost 3 years, maybe a little over 3 years. So I loved that job. And when it became clear there was going to be a cabinet shuffle, I was hoping that I would stay in that job. And the Prime Minister asked me to take on natural resources. This was Prime Minister Trudeau. And initially of course I said yes, but initially I wasn't entirely sure that I would like it as much as I did, but I would tell you that I did. It was a different way of thinking about it. It was more about building the future economy around critical minerals and different forms of energy generation and all of those kinds of things. So you were working on similar issues, but from a different perspective. Rather than sort of regulating climate or carbon emissions, you were trying to build that economy that would allow you to actually reduce carbon emissions and also create jobs. So I like both of them.
So yeah, that sounds very interesting. I'd love to get more into about the ministerial positions, but I'm going to focus a little bit more just on your current role as MP. Just if you could give a brief explanation of what a typical day in your life looks like, just for individuals. Since we're in a geography class, I know that not a lot of people know much about what the life of a politician looks like. So if you'd like to briefly go into that, what day in the life of Jonathan Wilkinson?
I mean, it depends a little bit on whether you're here or you're in Ottawa. So we typically, between middle of September and the end of June, we typically sit 3 weeks out of 4 in Ottawa. And when you're in Ottawa, it's a lot of work on things like committees. It's a lot of engagement with other members of parliament. There are caucus meetings that you need to go to. And of course, you need to do what's called house duty, which means you have to be in the house a certain amount of time. There's also a lot of stakeholders who come to Ottawa to have conversations about issues that animate them. And often those are larger organizations and associations and those kinds of things. And you spend a lot of time talking to those people and then trying to engage in a conversation with the relevant ministry about issues that they raise with you. Here in the riding, it's more meeting, sometimes it's stakeholders and stakeholder groups. Yesterday we had a long conversation about salmon and salmon allocation policies that were broader than just constituents. But you also have a lot of constituents who want to come in and talk to you about a specific issue that's important to them. So there's a lot of that. And then there are, announcements that happen in the riding. I have C-SPAN in my riding. There's often announcements at C-SPAN about different ships and those kinds of things. There are events. Tonight we're going to the Fire Festival, which is part of Nowruz, because I have a huge Iranian Canadian community, and I would tell you I've spent a lot of time with the Iranian Canadian community over the last few weeks, given what's going on in the world.
Of course, I would imagine. Yeah.
So it's a lot of engagement with local folks and then trying to ensure that you're addressing their concerns. And often they have specific concerns that you actually can address. I was dealing with the Minister of Public Safety about a particular issue that somebody came to me about yesterday. So it's those kinds of things, because part of your responsibility is to be the MP for all people who live in the riding, not just those that voted for you, and to try to actually ensure that they're heard and that their voices are heard in Ottawa in the policy formation process.
It's so refreshing to be able to speak with a representative. Again, I'm not in your riding or your region, but it's nice to see that there's a connection again between constituents and representatives, because oftentimes you feel like that there's a bit of a disconnect there. So that's awesome. Yeah. Now, I feel like we've talked enough about education and career, so we can just go into more about advice. So I'd like to discuss, what advice would you give to political science students looking to pursue a career in government and policymaking?
Well, I would say, first of all, I congratulate folks who actually have an interest in policymaking. At times, I think our society denigrates the importance of public policymaking and weighs far too much towards, the business side. I would say, couple things. I mean, the first is there are different pathways in terms of public policymaking. One is active politics, but there's getting involved in becoming a public servant and working on a number of different issues. You're not partisan, but you actually are part of the public policy process. At NRCan, I had, I think 6,000 or 7,000 people in the department that actually worked on a range of issues. And then there are people who end up going to think tanks like the Pembina Institute or the C.D. Howe Institute or those kinds of things. So it's I think, thinking about what do you want to be when you grow up. If there's an interest in politics, I often say to people, to young people, that it's important, in my view, to do something first before you get involved in active politics. To become an expert in something, it can be as a public servant, it can be as a nurse or a police officer or a business person, but have something to bring to the table, because part of being a representative is to make a contribution when you go to Ottawa. And if all you've ever done is politics, I sometimes question whether that, you have a sufficient basis to be an effective representative in those conversations. Not that interest in politics is not a good thing. It is a good thing. And the only other thing I would say is, if you have the opportunity to do policy, but also to go and work for a little while in the private sector, that's not a bad thing. In Canada, I think we would be far better served if people actually understood the two universes instead of actually living in two bubbles. And most people live in two bubbles.
Yeah. That's a very good point. It is important to balance both perspectives. Again, I keep mentioning perspective, but it feels as if politics is largely based on perspectives of everyone and accounting for all of them. So I do like that you mentioned, it's very profound that you mentioned working both in private and public could be more beneficial than just kind of an attachment of your experience. So that's great. So for individuals wanting to branch out into the clean technology sector, what advice would you give for them entering within? Is the sector ever changing, or is there opportunity for growth within clean energy?
Oh, there's huge opportunities for growth in clean energy or in clean technology. Clean technology, I would say, is broader than clean energy. So I would include like all the water-based technologies is part of clean tech. There are a range of things that are beyond energy that would be part of, the way I define clean tech is lightening the human footprint on the planet. Any technology that is actually oriented in that direction is part of the clean technology space. There are enormous opportunities now. The clean tech sector is growing a lot faster than most other sectors. I think there will be significant opportunities for folks on a go forward basis. But if you're interested in it, you have to figure out how you're relevant to it. So a lot of these early clean tech companies are largely engineers or scientists. I would just say folks need to think about how they actually fit and where they want to make a contribution. It's not like everybody's an engineer or a scientist. There are people who do business development and HR and all of those kinds of things. But you have to kind of think about what's the area and the space that you want to be in. But yeah, there are huge opportunities, both on the technology development side, but also on the technology deployment side. Companies that actually build solar farms and wind farms, hydroelectric facilities, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would imagine with growing emissions targets, we're trying to reduce them. So I feel like that's a great opportunity for people that are trying to go into clean energy. Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of my questions when we're making great time. So I feel like now is a good opportunity to ask you, where has life led you and what particular journey has been your favorite or the most memorable? You can take a second to think about that. It's a very hard-hitting question.
I would say we all have different parts of our life that are memorable. I certainly, as I said earlier, being at Oxford for 2 years was an enormously memorable and impactful part of my life. And, going from different experience to different experience from a career perspective, I think prepared me very well to end up going into politics, which was something I was always interested in. I think I loved being a cabinet minister. I actually thrived on the work. It was enormously intense. You worked very, very long hours, but that was a very meaningful part of my life.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It's refreshing to see someone speak about their career in such a positive way, just because as I'm beginning my kind of start into the career sector of my life and that approach, it tends to get overwhelming just because you never really know it until you know, and different paths lead you into different opportunities. So it's refreshing to hear that you have such a decorated list of experience. So it's nice to see that with change is growth. And yes, I appreciate you sharing that. So as a concluding note, after all of your life and career experiences, what would you choose to tell your 21-year-old self?
So I would say two things, one of which I think I actually did, but is, don't be afraid to try new things, have lots of experiences. There are different personality types. Obviously, there are some people who are quite happy being in the same job for 30 years, but I actually think I've benefited from the fact that I've done very different things. So I would have encouraged myself to do some of the things that I did, maybe even more of that. And when I was 21, it was before I went to Oxford, I probably would have said, work harder.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was great. Thank you. I just have a personal question. I'm very jealous that you guys live in British Columbia. Obviously, I come from an industrial sector of the GTA. So do you have any advice as I pursue my West Coast living? That dream has been set in me since I was a young one. Nadia, you can, again, join in on this one as well. This is more so a personal ask.
Yeah, well, Nadia, when did you come, Nadia?
I came in 2021, February, so it was kind of peak COVID time.
Tricky.
No, I loved it. I came from France originally, so it was a big move because I was there during the start of COVID. I think it's not so much advice as much as it is reinforcing your desire to move here. I've never been as content with just how much you get to do here. There's just as much opportunity, especially for career growth, as there is having a good work-life balance and being able to, feel grounded in the beautiful scenery. So it's a nice place to be peaceful and live, very happily balancing life and personal life, good personal life.
Yeah, and I would say there are lots of opportunities here. And it depends. You've got to narrow down a little bit what you're interested in doing. And then, you can start to investigate, what opportunities exist in the spaces that you're actually interested in pursuing. And then, back to the comment that you made, and I think Julie made, and then networking is really important, like finding some people who live here and they can talk to and they can actually help you. This is a very word of mouth kind of place.
Yeah.
It's different from Toronto, where it's much more your resume. Here
Yeah.
it's, oh, well, I heard that they're looking for somebody over here. And so doing some networking and meeting some people can be very helpful.
Very well said. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll definitely agree with that because that's been my experience. However many opportunities there are here, just coming in with a plan and also being able to network and feeling comfortable making those connections is so important. Yeah.
Well, and getting involved in some things, if you do come out here, getting involved in things that allow you to meet people. Like Nadia actually volunteered on my campaign. And then we hired her to do some work on the campaign. And then when we had an opening in the office, we offered the job to Nadia. But I would never have known Nadia if she hadn't actually come out and been part of the campaign.
It's awesome. Yeah. So building a community, I'll put that on top of my priority. That's, I feel like, where my hesitation is, just because it gets nerve-wracking, kind of leaving everything you know to go somewhere else. So that's
Yeah, it's
great.
normal.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I think we've left at a great point, and that's awesome. Thanks so
All
much.
right.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Renee.
you for
Good luck
taking
with
time out of your
with your
day.
project.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.
Take
Have a
care.
good day,
All right.
Renee. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.